Imagine you're just walking down the street, right? Just living your completely normal, everyday, boring life. And then suddenly, the entire physical world, as you know it, just completely collapses.
It's just one in an instant.
Exactly, gone. You are violently thrust into this chaotic, highly lethal intergalactic game show. And your only meaningful ally in this absolute nightmare is, of all things, your ex-girlfriend's highly demanding, scene-stealing, prize-winning Persian cat.
Which is just, I mean, the best premise ever.
It really is. That right there is the gloriously unhinged setup of Dungeon Crawler Carl. And if you're listening to this, you probably already know exactly how wild that ride is.
Oh, yeah. That wildly specific blend of total absurdity and apocalyptic stakes is the exact reason it's become this massive, just unstoppable word-of-mouth success story. I mean, it sits right at this perfect intersection of lit RPG, progression fantasy, and just really deep, biting sarcasm.
Right. And that's why we're here today. Because if you are sitting there staring at a massive, overwhelming pile of fantasy and sci-fi books right now, and you're wondering where on earth to go next after finishing Matt Dinniman's series, well, we are going to help you cut through all that noise.
Because it is a lot of noise.
It is. So for this deep dive, we are jumping into an incredible source article that curates 7 perfect follow-up reads for fans of this exact flavor of storytelling. We're going to break down which book you should pick up next, basically depending on what specific elements you love most about Carl and Princess Donut's journey.
And honestly, it is the perfect moment to explore this landscape. Because as Matt Dinniman himself noted in the source material, this genre, a lit RPG, it used to be a very small, very insular community.
Very niche.
Yeah, it's super niche. But recently, it's been leaking out the edges, as he put it. People completely outside of traditional nerd circles are talking about these books. The genre is hitting the mainstream. And that means there are these incredibly creative, massive stories just waiting to be discovered, you know, once you figure out how to actually navigate the space.
And to tackle this mountain of recommendations logically, we have to isolate the mechanics that make a book like Dungeon Crawler Carl so incredibly addictive. And the most obvious starting point, like the thing that hooks you before you even understand the magic systems or the monsters, is the humor.
Yeah, the humor is the anchor.
Specifically, that deeply relatable, highly sarcastic, reluctant hero archetype.
Well, because ordinary people use humor and sarcasm essentially as a survival mechanism, right? When an individual is dropped into an impossible situation and they have literally zero instruction manual, sarcasm becomes their primary armor against, well, total psychological collapse.
Okay, let's unpack this, because dropping an ordinary guy into an impossible situation without a manual is the entire engine driving our first recommendation. And that is He Who Fights with Monsters by the Australian author Travis Deverell, who writes under the pen name Shirtaloon.
Right, Shirtaloon.
So our protagonist here is Jason Asano. He's this entirely average guy who just suddenly wakes up in a magical world, and he is immediately confronted with bizarre monsters and these really complex societal rules that he has to learn instantly, basically just to avoid being killed.
What's fascinating here is how the author deliberately engineered the clash of sensibilities between the protagonist and the world. Like, Shirtaloon described his core concept as, what if Gandalf met Crocodile Dundee?
That's such a good pitch.
Right. He wanted to take the standard trope of a character being transported to another world, an isekai basically, and focus heavily on the profound cultural collision. Jason doesn't just gaze in awe at the majestic elves or bow down to the local nobility. He actively and vocally subverts their archaic systems.
The way I picture this, it's like taking a slightly cynical, maybe a bit pretentious guy from your local tabletop game store and dropping him directly into a high-stakes, deeply serious fantasy realm.
Oh, entirely.
Like, instead of becoming this noble, sword-wielding knight in shining armor who speaks in riddles, he just becomes deeply skeptical of everything. He meets mortal danger with relentless sarcasm and flat-out refuses to play by the rules of this new reality.
And Shirtaloon actually grounded that skepticism by giving Jason his own real-life flaws from his youth.
Yeah.
The author admitted he was, pretty insufferable when he was younger.
Which is very honest of him to admit.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he channeled that abrasive edge directly into Jason. I mean, they share a love for board games and this very specific nostalgia for the TV show Knight Rider.
Oh, wow. Knight Rider.
Yeah. But those deep character flaws, they're actually functional. They give Jason massive room to grow over what is a very long series. I mean, he starts off completely dismissed as this irritating outsider, but he gradually develops a highly unsettling set of dark magical powers.
Right, we're talking blood, curses.
That's exactly. And he gets tangled up in this massive political intrigue that completely dwarfs his initial struggle for survival.
Which makes sense, because if he started out as this flawless, perfect hero, there would be nowhere for a massive multi-book series to actually go. That friction is everything. Now, the source points out that this reliance on a highly sarcastic, heavily armed protagonist isn't just limited to fantasy. It applies this exact psychological profile to a sci-fi setting with The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells.
Which is an incredible series.
It is, but wait, I have to push back here for a second. The source is putting a sci-fi android who literally just wants to be left alone to binge-watch serialized soap operas in the same exact category as a guy fighting magical monsters. How does the psychological profile of a robot actually align with a hero like Carl in a dungeon or, Jason Asano?
Well, the alignment is entirely in how they process trauma and responsibility. Both are characters who absolutely never ask to be the center of these extraordinary events.
Okay, that's fair.
I mean, Murderbot isn't like Data from Star Trek, who is constantly trying to understand humanity and become more human. And it isn't a rogue AI seeking revenge against the corporate dystopia that built it, like you see in so many sci-fi tropes.
Ray doesn't want to destroy its creators?
Not at all. It has secretly hacked its own governor module, which grants it total free will, and it simply chooses to use that free will to watch media.
It literally just wants to watch TV in peace while the rest of the galaxy burns around it. I mean, honestly, relatable.
Highly relatable.
Yeah.
But the central paradox of the character is its desperate craving for isolation, contrasted with this super annoying, hard-coded instinct to protect humans.
Like it can't help itself.
Exactly. It constantly gets dragged into these massive corporate conspiracies and alien threats simply because it refuses to let vulnerable people die. So both Murderbot and Carl rely on this very dry, biting internal monologue to cope with the utter ridiculousness of the life-or-death situations they are forced to manage.
And that internal monologue is what makes all that chaos digestible for the reader, right?
Yeah.
You're laughing while everything is falling apart. But dry humor only gets you so far.
Yeah, eventually you have to fight.
Exactly. Once the initial shock wears off and the sarcasm kind of settles, the reality of survival sets in. And that's when the focus shifts to exploitation. Like, how do you game the system you've been trapped in? That drive to systematically conquer a world's rules, to grind and level up, that is what keeps you reading chapter after chapter.
Yeah, that addictive momentum of watching a character expand their scope and overcome just increasingly dangerous enemies, that is the defining mechanical hook of progression literature. And the prime example of systematically deconstructing a brutal framework, according to the source, is The Primal Hunter by Danish author Zogarth.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the protagonist here, Jake Thane, he's just a regular office worker having a totally mundane day. And then, bam, all of humanity is suddenly shoved into this brutal multiverse framework called the system.
It's just dropped right into it.
Yeah, Earth's entire society instantly collapses into this tutorial phase. And survival depends entirely on your willingness to evolve. And Jake, the office worker, turns out to have these incredible, almost terrifying instincts as an archer and a hunter.
Which is such a great pivot. And Zogarth built this incredibly complex engine under the hood for Jake to manipulate. Because instead of just handing him a magic bow and saying, hey, go shoot things, the author cherry-picked the absolute best elements of role-playing mechanics.
Well, yeah, the intricate dungeons, the highly specialized classes.
Right, and branching professions like alchemy. And he wove them into this cohesive ecosystem. So Jake has to actively calculate his stat distributions, he has to manage his unique bloodline abilities, and he's brewing these really complex poisons just so he can punch above his weight class.
It's the ultimate sandbox. You are watching a guy essentially build a broken character build in real time. But what I love about this is how Zogarth flips the standard motivation script. Usually the hero is forced to grind for power because, a loved one is in danger or they have to save the world.
The reluctant savior trope.
Exactly. Zogarth throws that completely out the window. Jake inherently wants to get stronger simply because he wants to hunt and kill bigger stuff.
Yeah, he just loves the thrill of it. And that shift removes all the typical manufactured angst and replaces it with pure, unadulterated momentum. And when we talk about explosive momentum and scope, the source immediately pairs that with Defiance of the Fall by Swedish author J.F. Brink.
Oh, man. The scope in this one is wild.
It's massive. The setup shares that apocalyptic DNA we've been talking about. So Zach Atwood is an ordinary guy whose quiet life is completely obliterated when Earth is integrated into this vast cosmic battlefield, forcefully merging with different dimensions.
And Zach's starting point is incredibly grim. I mean, he doesn't start with some overpowered magical bloodline like Jake. He gets trapped on an isolated island with literal demons pouring through a dimensional incursion.
Yeah, he's completely alone.
And he rolls a random, brutal melee class. He has to literally chop his way through an invasion with an axe just to survive the first week. The physical toll of that is insane to read about.
And the defining feature of this series is its staggering scope escalation. Brink actually admitted he wrote the early books at a frantic pace just to build his web serial audience.
Right, you have to keep feeding the algorithm.
Exactly. And that crazy pace forces Zach to constantly adapt. I mean, he goes from swinging a physical axe at low-level demons in the woods to navigating the politics of ancient undead empires, rival intergalactic races, and unimaginable cosmic forces. The mechanics of survival shift dramatically. It goes from just, swinging harder to managing planetary energy grids and understanding fundamental cosmic laws.
Moving from survival in the woods to intergalactic cosmic warfare is a wild ride for a reader. It's like reading 5 different genres in one series. But while Zach relies heavily on this massive cosmic interface to advance, not every character gets a handy digital stat screen to tell them how strong they are.
No, some have to do it the hard way.
Right, some have to forge their power completely from scratch, which brings us to Cradle by Will White. Now, the article specifically clarifies that Cradle falls under the umbrella of progression fantasy, rather than strict lit RPG.
Right, because the presentation lacks the blue screens and the literal experience points.
Yeah.
But the fundamental DNA of leveling up is completely identical. Will White noted the series was born from the unnatural union of translated web novels and anime.
Which is a beautiful combination.
It really is. It creates a world where societal status and personal value are entirely dictated by a person's proficiency in the sacred arts.
The way I try to explain progression fantasy to people is imagine watching a high-yield savings account compound interest over years and years.
Okay, I like that.
Right. But instead of money, it's magical martial arts power. You start with a single dollar, and by the end, you're buying the entire bank. So in Cradle, the protagonist, Lyndon, is born unsold. He's considered entirely incapable of practicing the sacred arts, which places him at the absolute bottom of a society that only respects strength.
So he literally has to claw his way up from that absolute 0 point.
Yeah.
And this series meticulously tracks his journey from being the weakest person in the room to becoming one of the most formidable figures in existence.
We see all the granular details, right?
Exactly. We see him learning to cycle vital aura, harvest magical remnants, and just painfully forge his spirit through distinct advancement stages, from copper to iron to jade and way beyond.
Okay, but I have to ask a logistical question here. If the whole point of these books, whether it's Jake brewing his poisons or Zach swinging his axe or Lyndon cycling aura, is just endless power scaling,
Yeah.
where is the actual tension? Like, if the hero just keeps getting stronger and stronger, doesn't it eventually just get boring for the reader?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the tension in these stories relies entirely on the underdog element. The authors never hand the protagonists unearned power.
Okay, so it's about the struggle.
Completely. Every single victory, especially for Lyndon and Cradle, is paid for in blood and relentless effort. He wins not because he's inherently stronger, but because he's willing to outwork, outsmart, and outsuffer foes that are vastly superior to him.
Right.
And the enemies scale up just as fast, if not faster, than the heroes do. So when they finally achieve that next tier of power, it feels deeply satisfying because the reader witnessed the agonizing, granular struggle required just to get there.
So it's not about being invincible at all. It's about the brutal struggle to just inch forward. But, brute force and endless power scaling do have a ceiling. Eventually, you encounter a problem you simply cannot punch, blast, or chop your way out of.
Yeah, the stat screen can't save you.
Exactly. And that's where the narrative shifts. You have to outsmart the system.
And that's where the appeal transitions from watching someone grow physically stronger to watching an infinitely resourceful mind deconstruct an impossible puzzle. It becomes a game of brains over brawn.
And the poster child for this approach in our source is The Perfect Run by the French author Maxime J. Durand, who also goes by the pen name Void Herald. The main character here, Ryan Romano, operates entirely on this principle.
Such a cool concept for a book.
It is. His specific power is that whenever he dies, time resets to a fixed point in his life. So he arrives in this superpowered, highly volatile dystopian city called New Rome, and he is chasing the perfect run. That's a single timeline where he manages to navigate all the warring factions and save everyone he cares about.
Which is a logistical nightmare. Achieving that perfect timeline is insanely difficult because there are just so many moving parts. You have rival gangs, massive corporate entities, unpredictable supervillains.
It's exactly like watching a speedrunner mastering a brutally difficult video game. Like, imagine you are playing a Mario level, but with mafia bosses. Imagine Ryan walking into a massive bank heist. On run 1, he walks through the front door and immediately gets shot by a hidden sniper.
Boom, dead.
Dead. He dies and resets. On run 2, he dodges the sniper, but he accidentally triggers an explosive tripwire. He dies and resets again.
Trial and error.
By run 50, he is literally walking through a hail of bullets with his eyes closed, tossing a stray coffee cup that perfectly jams the bomb's trigger mechanism. He turns constant, agonizing failure into usable data.
And Duran was incredibly strategic in how he built that narrative loop, because he recognized that readers want emotional stakes alongside that pure progression mechanic.
It can't just be a robot learning a maze.
Exactly. So he focused heavily on the core cast and the character dynamics. The time loop mechanic is the engine of the story, sure, but the deep world building and the genuine evolving connections Ryan forms with the people of New Rome, that's what keeps the reader anchored. It proves that you can have a highly technical premise, but it needs a beating heart to survive.
And that trial and error methodology isn't just limited to time loops either. If you apply that exact same logical deconstruction to deep space, you get our final source recommendation, which is We Are Legion, We Are Bob, by Dennis E. Taylor. This is the launch pad for the very famous Bobbyverse series.
Which is just a brilliantly executed sci-fi concept.
It really is. So Bob Johansson is a software entrepreneur who signs up for cryopreservation, thinking it's just, a morbid insurance policy.
Like a lot of tech guys do.
Right. But he wakes up a century later to discover he is no longer human. He is the digital AI controlling a self-replicating interstellar space probe.
Which is a lot to take in on a Tuesday.
So what does this all mean? Like, how does a story about a software guy turning into a massive fleet of space probes scratch the exact same itch as exploring a magical fantasy dungeon?
Well, it comes entirely down to the protagonist's mindset and the rigorous application of logic. Dennis E. Taylor was actually a computer programmer before becoming a full-time writer.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Doesn't it? And that analytical, troubleshooting logic just completely saturates the text. As Bob explores the galaxy, he applies the scientific method to survival. He operates as a von Neumann probe. So he's mining raw materials from asteroids, he's building automated 3D printing factories in space, and then he's replicating his own digital consciousness into new probes.
He's literally cloning his mind.
Yeah. And then these Bobs have to coordinate across light years to protect humanity's scattered survivors from these massive cosmic threats.
I read that the origin of this massive sci-fi phenomenon is actually hilarious. Taylor was reading a terrible book, and he complained to his wife that he could write something better, and she just challenged him to prove it.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. And he had two concepts floating in his head, flipped a coin, and that coin flip birthed the Bobbyverse.
The fact that such a meticulously plotted, science-heavy series started with a literal coin toss is just fantastic. But the genius of the book is that Bob relies on curiosity, optimism, and scientific problem-solving. He doesn't have magical spells. He uses physics, orbital mechanics, and engineering, paired with a very witty internal monologue to outmaneuver extinction-level threats.
It's so good. So whether you lean toward fantasy magic systems or superhero time loops or deep space sci-fi probes, the core joy connecting every single one of these recommendations for you is watching a clever mind deconstruct a rigged game. It's that thrill of seeing someone ordinary use every single tool at their disposal to beat an impossible system.
The setting changes, whether it's a dungeon or a galaxy, but the deeply satisfying narrative engine remains the exact same.
We've covered some serious ground today. I mean, we started with sarcastic, reluctant heroes using dry humor to shield themselves from madness.
A must-have.
We dug into the deeply satisfying, highly addictive mechanics of grinding and leveling up against impossible odds. And we wrapped up with the tactical joy of outthinking the universe when sheer power just isn't enough.
This raises an important question, though. If you look at almost all the protagonists we discussed today, you have an IT guy, a software programmer, an ordinary office worker. These are perfectly average people trapped in modern, often mundane lives.
Very relatable lives.
Exactly. It's only when a massive cosmic event or a mysterious system violently upends their reality that they are given a clear, undeniable path to greatness. It makes you wonder. In a real world where success often feels random, rigged, or completely devoid of a clear instruction manual, is the explosive mainstream popularity of lit RPG actually just a reflection of our deep collective desire for a reality where hard work guarantees that you will finally level up?
Oh, that is a fantastic thought to chew on. Deep down, I think we all just want a stat screen that clearly tells us we're actually making progress in life.
Just a little blue box that says, "Good job."
That's all we're asking for. Well, grab one of these books, dive into a new universe, and remember, if the world ever does collapse into an intergalactic game show, stay sarcastic, keep leveling up, and whatever you do, protect the cat. Catch you next time.